My name is Ted Tolavoro. I am a senior undergraduate at Emory University. We are at the CDC today interviewing Tim Miner, and today's date is April 2nd, 2008, and the interviewee has given permission for this taping. First of all, Tim, if I could have you introduce yourself, who are you, and tell me a little bit about your background.
Okay. My name is Howard Gordon Miner, but I go by the nickname Tim, and I've had that nickname from birth because when I was born there were already two other Howards in the family, and they needed something to differentiate me from the rest of the Howards, so I got the moniker Tim. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and left in 1970. I taught for a couple of years in the inner city in Detroit. I went to Swaziland in the Peace Corps in 1970. And I'd just like to say, Ngiyajabula Gugubona Wena Gakulu Manje, which is Siswati for, I'm very happy to see you now. So I do recall some of the languages that I picked up along the way. I taught in Swaziland for a year until I discovered that we were taking jobs away from unemployed Swazi teachers. So I mentioned to my Peace Corps director at the time I would like to go and do something else. I wasn't real enamored with teaching anyway, and I certainly didn't want to unemploy a Swazi teacher. So because I spoke French, they sent me to Zaire with the Smallpox Eradication Program, but they almost sent me to Morocco as an agricultural photographer. So I could be in a whole different career by now had I not gone to Zaire. In Zaire, the Smallpox Program was headed by Dr. Pierre Ziegler. And when I landed in Kinshasa, I went first to the Peace Corps office and signed in and did all the paperwork and met all the people, and then went over to the WHO office in Kinshasa. And I had this lengthy conversation in French with Dr. Ziegler, and I realized that I really needed to get up to speed on my French rather quickly. And so I did, and he showed me how to give an immunization. And he had a clinic there once a week. So there was a lady that came in, and you know you have the bifurcated needle, and you take the arm and kind of squeeze the flesh and rest your wrist on the arm, and you just jab it a couple times. So he said, while you're doing that, tell me exactly what you're doing so that I'll know that you understand what I told you. So I'm giving her the immunization, and you're supposed to just prick the skin a little bit until there's a trace of blood. Well, for those who speak French, the word for blood and the word for monkeys sound about the same. So as I was explaining what I was doing, I said, you just prick the skin until you see a trace of monkeys. And everybody just broke up laughing because they couldn't understand why. And the lady wondered what kind of a vaccination I was giving her that she'd get a trace of monkeys on her skin. So that was my introduction to the immunization program there. I went to my field station, which was then in northern Shaba, ex-Katanga province. And there was another Peace Corps volunteer there, Ken Bloom. And so we did a stage in the field first, and then came back, and he left and left me there. But getting a little ahead of myself, while I was in Kinshasa with Dr. Ziegler, he said, all right, you're a Peace Corps volunteer, but we don't want you to conduct yourself as a volunteer, tell anybody that you're a volunteer, or live like a volunteer. I don't know what his preconceptions of volunteers were, but I listened intently. And he said, and to make sure you don't live like a volunteer, we're going to supplement your $75 a month income from the Peace Corps with an additional $400 from WHO. I said, it works for me. So went out there in the field and took my station. I had 3 Land Rovers, an office, a furnished 2-bedroom apartment, and a staff of 4. So I was the chef d'équipe, the team leader of an epidemiological investigation team. And we were in the field about 28 days a month, back at the home base only 2 days a month, because I like to travel and be in the field, and there wasn't a lot to do at home base. And my African staff liked to be gone more so that they could be making money and they wouldn't be home spending it and having relatives come around and so on and so forth, as it was explained to me. So we were in town maybe 2 days to file a report, and I had a two-way radio so I could talk to Kinshasa. And there was Mr. Ali, an Egyptian, that ran the radio, and I was talking to him, and I said I needed this piece of equipment to repair a Land Rover. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, well, I know what it is in French. I'd been so immersed in French I forgot, even though I grew up in Detroit, what this particular part was. And so I said, well, I'll tell you in French, and if you know what it is, you tell me what it is in English, because I've forgotten. So he did that, and we got the parts and went on. I was in Zaire at a particularly historical moment when Mobutu Sese Seko Wazabanga, the president of Zaire at the time, was just initiating his Authenticité campaign. So he renamed the Congo River the Zaire River, renamed the country Zaire, renamed the currency Zaire, and told all Zaireois, all citizens, that they had to change their names from Christian names to African names. So I talked to my team and I said, well, you know, after I learned all their names, I said, well, you're going to have to tell me what your African name is, and then tell me how you want me to address you. And so, so that worked out fine. That wasn't a problem. When it came time for me to leave, when I went to Zaire, I had to give another year to Peace Corps. Normally it's 2 years, but since I had done one in Swaziland, I went to Zaire for 2 years. And part of the way through that, I got home leave. And I went to Geneva, and on a Sunday afternoon, I went to the WHO headquarters and walked into D.A. Henderson's office. And he was there on a Sunday afternoon, and I said, well, D.A., I'd like, you know, I've done this work in Zaire. I'd like to have a job. I'm going to be leaving the Peace Corps. I'd like to have a job with WHO, if you think that's possible in another country. He said, well, I'll look into it. 4 weeks later, I got back to Kinshasa, and I was offered a job with WHO in Bangladesh. But I had to go back to my post and turn over all the operations to the African staff at the time, which I enjoyed doing because they were certainly capable of doing everything that I did. And it became a philosophy of mine in working in a host country to always, whenever possible, to have a host country counterpart working with me. And I would try to build as much infrastructure or leave more than what I came with. And that has been one of my standards that I've had. So I left the post, went to Kinshasa to visit Peace Corps, and I couldn't find the office. The office had changed location. So I found the office, walked into the office, and they weren't the same people that were there. And so I introduced who I was and said, I'm ready to check out. And at that time, John McEnany, who I think also has done some work in smallpox, was there, and he said, oh yes, Tim Miner, I think I've seen your name somewhere. Where have you been? You've been gone for about 2 years. So all the staff, the office, everything had changed, all the people, and so we signed out of there, and I headed off to Zaire via Nairobi, to Bangladesh via Nairobi. In Bangladesh, let me see, let me back up a little bit and tell you a brief story in Zaire about an immunization campaign. We used petojets, but we also used the bifurcated needles. Because the city of Kalimé on Lake Tanganyika was bordered on a rebel-occupied area, and we had some reports of smallpox in there, but we really couldn't go into that area to investigate. What we decided to do, Ken Bloom and I, was to hold a mass immunization campaign in that town, or a little bit outside of town, with the hopes that the people from that area would come in and be immunized. So that was my first mass vaccination campaign, and we called Kinshasa and had them send us immunization certificates and some additional petojets and vaccines and things, and we held a mass campaign, and that was really exciting because we had the local person said everybody should come and you'll get a certificate, and they may be checking people to make sure that they had a certificate that they had an immunization. So we had large crowds of people, and we had to spread this out over about 10 days to get everybody vaccinated. But that was a pretty exciting thing. And there's another city we visited on Lake Tanganyika, and it was a mission there, and I tried to stay at the missions because they had the best food, the best accommodations, and a variety of beverages, and the best conversation that was available at that time. And if I were to fall ill, I'd be in pretty good hands because there's nurses nearby and so on. At this one mission, there was a Belgian father. Actually, he was a German father, and he tanned hides. So I said, well, can you make me some shoes, because my store-bought American shoes didn't last very long and were getting kind of threadbare. He said, sure. So I had him make a pair of boots a year for me, and that's about how long they lasted. But there was also, he tanned some other hides. I bought, and this was before environmentalists and so on and so forth, so I had an alligator hide, a python skin that was probably about 30 feet long, and a puff adder. And I sent those home to the States, where my nieces and nephews used them as show and tell in schools, and they were a big hit. So I'm back headed for Bangladesh now, and I'm in Nairobi, through Nairobi to New Delhi, and got an orientation in New Delhi, and then went to Bangladesh. When I arrived in Bangladesh, Stan Foster was there, Stan Music was there, Neilton Arndt from Stan Foster and Music are from CDC. Neilton was Brazilian and with WHO. Nick Ward, Dr. Ward is a physician from the UK, and then there was myself, and I was the youngest, only non-physician, and I was the only one that wasn't married. So guess where I ended up working in Bangladesh, the most remote riverine areas of the country. I had Borishal, Patwakali, and Faridpur. And there was a hospital ship that the Germans had donated to Bangladesh a couple of years before I arrived. And Stan had arranged for a bunch of they're moped-like, or Vespa-like Honda motor scooters to be put on all over the deck. And he said, I want you to get on that boat and go down there and eradicate smallpox from those 3 provinces down there. I said, is that all? Any other instructions? And so I did, got on the boat, introduced myself to the captain, and I was able to supplement the pay of the crew nominally for the extra expenses incurred and what they did. And so we towed a speedboat. This ship was probably 45, 50 feet long and had a draft of about 3 feet, 4 feet. It was fairly shallow. And I had a forward cabin. And we had our immunization team on there, and we went down to Barisal first and docked, and stayed at a mission there for a couple of days, met with the chief medical officers, and then went on down to Faridpur. I taught myself Bengali, smallpox Bengali, and to this day, when I speak with Bengalis I meet in Atlanta and elsewhere, I've been informed that I speak sort of like a villager or a fisher person, not like a university professor, which is fine because those are the people with whom I communicated all the time, and didn't have any problems doing that. I was able to conduct a smallpox investigation by using my Bengali. All right. an interesting incident. Our team was made up of myself, and we had a combination of Muslim and Hindu staff on the team, vaccinators and interpreters, and there was a chief and so on. And everybody got along fine, and it was just a wonderful experience. We had a speedboat driver as well, and so we would get down in the morning into the speedboat and go off and investigate the reports that we had. And one time we were coming back rather late at night, and there was a full moon, and we were in the Brahmaputra, which is the main river in Bangladesh. And in the riverine areas, there are a lot of channels, and we were out in the main river, and we were going rather fast. And the next thing we knew, we were out of the boat, head over heels, in the river. But we weren't in the water. We had hit what's called a mud flat. And in the mud, when you have a mud flat in the water, you can't tell because the water is just barely over the mud, and the mud in the dark or in the moonlight seems to be water. So we hit that, and the motor went up, and all of us were thrown out of the boat in the middle of the river on this mud flat, covered in mud. And when we regained our senses, we were just laughing hysterically at the absurdity of the situation. We put our stuff back in the boat and pushed off and got back to the speedboat. One particular investigation that stands out to me is I went to a village, and the villagers, this young man and some other people, took me to this brand new hut. I mean, it was just brand new. It had just been built. And they said the patient is in there, and they led me inside, and on the mat on the floor, there was no furniture or anything else. There was just this mat on the floor in the middle of the hut. Was a person under a cover, a cloth, completely covered. And I was prepared to, take the cover off and examine, see if it's smallpox. And they took the whole cover off themselves, and there was this young woman covered with smallpox from head to toe of the confluent. There wasn't a space on this person that there wasn't a pox. And so I knew right away what it was and thanked him and stepped out. And this young man starts explaining to me that this is his new wife, his new bride. And I said, gosh, I feel very badly about that. I know that vaccinators had been in this village before. Would you, how come she wasn't vaccinated? Was she away or something? He said, no. He said, I hid her from the vaccinators because I didn't want her to have a smallpox scar on her skin. I said, oh, I see. And you can't be judgmental or demonstrative or emotional at times like that. You have to really kind of step back emotionally a little bit from that. So I said, well, what would you do differently? He said, well, I'm looking for another wife, and my next wife will be vaccinated. But what struck me was that it was preventable, and here was this young person, a young woman, in just the beginning of her life, with so much in front of her to look forward to being a mother, a grandmother, a husband, a sister, and so on. And her life ended in such a tragic way. So I had several of these reminders throughout Bangladesh. I might add also that while working in Zaire, I hadn't actually seen a real case of smallpox. It had been eradicated, but we were monitoring it at the time. So Bangladesh was the first time that I had seen live smallpox. And
what was your first impression when you arrived in Bangladesh?
Well, when I arrived in Bangladesh and the subcontinent, I was impressed by the density of population. I had never seen, apart from a market in Africa, I had never seen so many people. I once did an experiment driving on the road, trying to count 10 seconds, just 1 and 2, and up to the number 10. looking out the side of my window to see if there was ever any space where there wasn't evidence of human beings being there. So the land was either occupied by a house or a structure of some kind, or it was planted. That was it. There was no vacant land, no land in Bangladesh that was not touched by human hands. We also, because of the density, when I was there, we had confined a lot of the smallpox cases and isolated them, and were in the process of eradicating them when the government tore down the busties or the slums of Dhaka, just went in with bulldozers, and it acted as a centrifuge, spinning out cases of smallpox all over the country, reintroducing smallpox into areas that had recently been freed of the cases. So that, you know, our number of cases went skyrocketing again, and so that was a little disheartening. Another time I was down in the riverine areas, and Stan Foster was up in Dhaka, and I think I was at the furthest, most remote place at the time on the ship, and I got on the radio and talked to Stan, and what we were trained to do was to investigate the cases of smallpox and find out who had been visiting, and what were their names, and where did they go, and where did they live, and so on and so forth. So as a matter of routine, I gave Stan this information about who this person was and the name and when they had visited and so on and so forth, and not really expecting that, you know, all these millions and millions of people, he's going to find them. But he did. He went to the address and he asked for the person, and he found the person and immunized the person, and was able to prevent the next generation of smallpox from that person having visited there. So anything is possible. We lived with the people in the host country. I lived on the ship. I lived with Bengalis all the time. I rarely saw another European. There were some care people that I would meet on occasion. But I learned the language and the culture, and they embraced me, and I embraced them figuratively, and it just worked very well. And I can't imagine eradicating smallpox with a kind of a visit and then come out and then visit and come out type of approach that it didn't occur to me to do it any other way other than to go to a respective country and live there and work there and learn about the people and the culture and the religion and so on. I worked for 6 months in the riverine areas on the hospital ship and was fairly able to get smallpox under control there. And then I was transferred to the north, Jamalpur, and went from a boat to a motorcycle. And that's when I met, after I'd been working up there, getting things organized, I met Stephen Jones. Dr. Jones was up there, and Marty Lutz, and Pete Hargrove, and these are people I've met and known since then. And we had people come from CDC, a lot of consultants as well, short-term consultants for 3-month or 6-month stints. And I was having breakfast with one of the fellows, and it usually consists of a chapati and some eggs or something like that. And he said, "Well, how do you manage with all of these poor raggedy kids and poor people and people kind of on their last leg, and they look very unhealthy?" And I said, "Yes, I never know when I walk past someone coming back in the afternoon whether they'll be alive or dead, and that has happened many times." I said, "Well, you know, it's not that I'm unsympathetic or that I don't care, but I know well enough that I can do one of two things. I can either devote my life to trying to alleviate the pain and the suffering and feeding and clothing of less fortunate people, or I can do my job and working to eradicate smallpox, and that will benefit them. At least they won't die of smallpox." Well, since then, I've learned that Bangladesh has done quite well economically. Many of the clothes that I buy today are made in Bangladesh that weren't made in Bangladesh at the time. And I understand that they're doing much better than when I was there at the time. So that's heartening to know.
In a book that's been written about smallpox in India, the author postulates that the only reason that smallpox was eradicated was by compulsion.
Yeah. Smallpox could not have been eradicated by compulsion. People all over the world cannot be coerced for long to do something that they don't want to do themselves, that they don't want to do willingly. And I relied on reason and understanding and cultural sensitivity when explaining the benefits of immunizations, and if somebody chose not to, then so be it. I felt very disappointed because I knew the preventive benefits of that, but nobody was ever forced. And I had people approach me afterwards, and as I was leaving, and say, "Come, we've decided we want you to do some immunizing." We also, out of respect for a variety of cultures, engaged female vaccinators, and that worked very well. And so that we were able to honor the customs of the country and have ladies vaccinate ladies, and so I think we did much better that way. But in Zaire and in Bangladesh and in Somalia, where I worked, there was never any thought of coercing people. Governments may issue declarations that there's a smallpox vaccination day, or you should be immunized for smallpox, or so on. But even when we were doing the mass campaign and there were police officials organizing the lines of people, there was nobody. They were there voluntarily, and they recognized the benefits of immunization as opposed to having the disease. So that's an important point to clarify. And by way of this tape, I want to thank all of the host country nationals that have kept me safe over the years, and to this day when I travel overseas. They're very protective and solicitous and very good people to be working with. And I did not eradicate smallpox. I worked with hundreds of, or thousands of Bengalis and Zairewa and Somalis to do that. And so it's to their credit. They are the ones that are responsible for our success, because if you show sensitivity and you show honesty and a true spirit, they'll go with you anywhere, anytime, day or night, 7 days a week, to carry out the work. So this is something that I want the people that will view this tape in the future to know, that this was truly a global effort of people all over the world coming together for this one cause. And I don't think there had, apart from world wars, and even in world wars, there wasn't all the countries coming together. Some were in conflict, but in this particular case, to achieve the eradication of smallpox, it's the first time in human history that a disease has been eradicated by human beings, that human beings have rid themselves of this pest that goes back to recorded history. And so I really would like to see something like that happen again, because they were really heady days and really wonderful things to experience. After I finished in the north in Bangladesh on the motorcycle, last 6 months I came down to Dhaka to be the finance officer. And we had as many as 75 or 100 short-term volunteers in Bangladesh at one time, and everybody had to have money, and everybody had to have a system of accounting for it. So based on my year and a half there and handling and accounting of money, I developed a spreadsheet. Now, we call it a spreadsheet, but we didn't have Excel at that time. You had to draw something by hand and then had people look at it and review it, and then it went to the printer, and then they sent you a proof, and then you looked at that to make sure it was all right because they were going to print, you know, 1 million copies of it, so it better be right. And so I developed this spreadsheet about yay big, and people would put a carbon paper. That's not too many people know what that is, but anyway, it allows you to write on one side of the paper, and it'll come through on the next page. So that's what we used, and I was in charge of training the volunteers, the short-term consultants that come in, to account for this system. Very simple system. You get a receipt, make sure it has the date, write down what it was, and put the number in sequence of what it was, and then put that number on your spreadsheet and just write down what it was, and your beginning balance and then your ending balance. That's all you have to do, nothing more than that. And we gave them a briefcase of money and of taka, and they went off. And while we had these people out there with their briefcases full of money containing smallpox and whatnot, the government decided to have a demonetization effort. And they demonetized all the money and said all the money had to be returned to the bank, and they'd give you a receipt for it because they're going to issue new currency. Well, needless to say, that put our campaign in a bit of a bind because people then couldn't get paid and so on. So our people had to go to the banks, wherever they were in the field, turn in the money, get a receipt. And we got a special dispensation from the president of the country and the head of the Treasury that said we would be given, among the first ones to be given the new currency right away as soon as we turned in the old money, so that we could keep the campaign going. So there were little exciting moments like this that happened from time to time. And we were working with nationalities. All nationalities were involved. And as you know, the Americans and the Russians, and I forget if it was originally the Russians' idea and the Americans joined in or what it was, but we got WHO to accept this program. And so in Bangladesh, we were working occasionally with Russians. And they liked our cigarettes and we liked their vodka, so we'd, you know, trade in that stuff. But they thought that we were working for the CIA, and we knew they were working for the KGB. I mean, there just wasn't any way they'd be let out of the country if they weren't. None of us were CIA, but, you know, you couldn't change their mind on that. So we worked with a lot of different nationalities, and a character in particular stands out, Dr. Larry Brilliant. And he's a physician from Detroit and went to study with a guru in India. And the guru said, you're going to eradicate smallpox from India. You're going to join the Smallpox Eradication Program. And he went to DA and said, I need a job. And Nicole Grasset, who's a French woman physician who headed the regional office of smallpox campaign in Delhi, said, no, we really don't have anything for you, and went back to the guru, and the guru said, go back. Anyway, he ended up working in the Smallpox Eradication Program and was instrumental with others in getting Tata Industries to put in money and to organize their workers and have support eradication efforts there. Now, Tata Industry, as you know, just bought Jaguar and Land Rover from Ford Motor Company, so give you an idea of how the world has changed. When I left Bangladesh, I had decided that I needed, global public health was the love of my life. It was what I felt I was born to do. I wasn't going back to teaching. I really couldn't do anything else after having done something this exciting. So I went back to Michigan via Asia and signed up at the University of Michigan School of Public Health to do an MPH. Well, who should I find there but Larry Brilliant is my academic advisor, and Steve Jones is a student there as well. So I tell you just can't get away from these people. But I had to delay my admission to the University of Michigan. I had to call them up and said, well, I have to go to the Cameroon. Stan Foster wanted me to go to Cameroon to do an assessment of the whole country's health system for the program that was to follow on from a smallpox campaign, which was the expanded program on immunization. So I designed a questionnaire, visited the whole country, every health facility in the whole country, and left the report there, and then went back to the University of Michigan to start my degree. While I was there, I met Dave Heyman, who was assigned there, and he was taking over after Bernie Geyer that had left. And so I talked a little bit with Dave and showed him the report, and he thanked me, and we went off. And 2 years later, I forget what country I was in, maybe I was in the Philippines at the time, I got this a note from David Heyman thanking me for this report, that it was so comprehensive that it has been the principal reference document for them in establishing their expanded program on immunization. And again, that was made possible by traveling and working with and the support of the Cameroonians. I had a small staff and a driver that we went around to do that. That's nothing I did by myself. So it's good to know that that what you do works out quite well. Okay, a little bit about smallpox in Somalia. I was at the University of Michigan, and Michigan liked the idea of a student coming in with the experience that I had, and in the summer times working as a consultant. So I was invited to go and work in Somalia as a consultant for 3 or 4 months. And I was assigned to a small town of Merka, which is just south of Mogadishu. And Somalia was very safe at the time, and there wasn't any problems or anything like there is now. And because of the lack of availability of food, we were on sea rations. So we had a little Bunsen burner, and we opened the cans and cooked our food. In the town of Merka lived the world's last case of smallpox, and I've forgotten his name, but we were doing scab surveys, and so I needed to interview. The word went out that I needed to interview anybody that had pox or scabs. And he showed up and introduced himself, and I knew who he was, and he said, you know, I've been interviewed by the New York Times and the Washington Post and the London Times and the Straits Times and newspapers all over the world by these reporters, and they pay me handsomely for the interviews. What do you have for me? And I said, well, I don't work for a fancy newspaper. I'm not a reporter, and all I have is you know, a couple of cans of the sea rations that I have, a couple of aspirin, and maybe some malaria tablets. But to tell you the truth, that's all I have. With a little bit of pause, he said, okay, we'll do it. So I interviewed him, and that was a telling moment. Another instance, Peter Carrasco and I went, he was working there as well, went and lived with the nomads and their camels for about a week, and we did some blood sticks for antibody levels in neonates, and I did a paper at the University of Michigan on those findings. And it was really enjoyable. Whenever I go to a country, I really like to be with the people and learn of their customs and certainly their language, which is a beginning to opening doors to their culture. Always try and learn just a few words of a language. And in Somalia, there were no smallpox cases at the time, but we almost lost a couple people. I remember one time coming back to a base camp that we had with some offices and things, finding Peter Carrasco on the floor of the lavatory. He had passed out, so I got him back up and we got him healthy again, and that was all right. But Steve Fitzgerald, who was working in the north, I forget the name of the districts, but way in the north there, almost died of dehydration. He had a bad case of diarrhea, and all that he and his driver could do is pull off by the side of the road and underneath the tree, and he had some rehydration salts and some purified water, and so the driver nursed Steve back to health enough so that he could get back to Mogadishu and continue his work.
I think we could go on all afternoon with this, Howard.
We could.
You want to finish off with
What this means, or how it has changed me, or?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
I think you pretty much told us what it's done for you.
Right. In fact, it has changed my life. Just a couple sentences. When I had dinner with Ken Bloom and his wife Royce, who also helped with the eradication program in Bangladesh, and we ran up into them in Boston many years ago. They had children at the time, my wife and I didn't. They said, well, if you have children, it's going to change your life forever. And I didn't quite know what they were talking about until we had children, and it will change your life forever. And that's how I would attribute my work and experience with the Smallpox Eradication Program. It has changed my life. It changed my life forever. I wouldn't trade any of it. I wouldn't do any of it. I would do it all over again, about the same way that I had in the past. But it's just a rare opportunity. And when I'm back and I meet with people and tell them a little bit about that, I make an effort to thank them for their contributions to the program, because they're taxpayers. And it's rare that a taxpayer really has any kind of connection with what's going on overseas and how their tax dollars are being spent overseas. So I try and make an effort to that, to bring them into the activity a bit themselves. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
That was a great interview. It really was.